So then, while the weather may be a bit cooler here today, things are sure to be getting hot under the collar in Parliament later. MPs begin 2 days of debating and voting on the details of Brexit. Theresa May wants to overturn a series of amendments made by the Lords, but she could face a possible defeat if some of her own MPs side with Labour in opposing the government. Well, one of her own MPs joins me live now from Westminster. That's the Welsh Conservative MP, James Heappey. Good morning to you, James.
Good morning, Claire.
Thank you for being with us. Also in the studio, the Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate for Taunton Deane, Gideon Amos. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Thank you both. James, we're going to start with you because I know that there's been talk of the meeting of Conservative MPs last night. How did that go?
I think it went quite well. The Prime Minister reminded the parliamentary party of what the withdrawal bill is actually there to achieve. And the key point is that we need to signal to the EU that we're on our way and that there is a clear mandate from Parliament for that to be the case, which significantly strengthens the Prime Minister's hand and helps her to get the best deal on Brexit.
How are you going to vote?
On the amendments today, I intend to vote with the government. I think that the amendments in lieu that have been tabled are very reasonable and good compromises between some of the things that have been added by the Lords and the position that we took when it went through the Commons earlier in the year. And I hope that we can see this done and dusted and the bill off for royal assent by the end of the week. Has
that been an easy decision for you to come to?
No, the whole withdrawal bill process has been extraordinarily exacting. There have been over 250 hours of parliamentary debate. The Parliament has had tabled before it over 1,000 amendments from opposition parties, hundreds of amendments from the government itself. And it's important to realise that what we're looking at today is the product of all of that debate, the product of the consideration of the House of Commons, the consideration of the House of Lords, and I think what we've arrived at is something that's very sensible, providing that we adopt these amendments in lieu where the government has tabled them, and that we should be able to put forward quite a good bill to the Queen for royal assent, hopefully before too long.
Let's bring in Gideon at this stage. Gideon, from your point of view, what do you want to see happen today?
Well, I think the real problem is we've got a government that's floundering around with what is the biggest question affecting our country and our economy in over a generation. And what I think people want to see is that if the iceberg appears on the horizon, there are checks and balances, excuse me, in the process, so that Parliament has a very meaningful decision it can make if things are going wrong, including the option in future to put the deal that comes back to the country in the form of a referendum on the deal. These are the kind of checks and balances that any sensible country, any sensible parliament would be asking for. And for the government to be trying to stitch it up and pretend everybody is united and a kind of, you're launching, the country's launching Dad's Army stamps. We've got Boris Johnson going around saying there's going to be a meltdown, but don't panic. This is not responsible government we're getting from the Conservatives. It's about putting the Conservative Party first. And if we wanted to put the country first, we would have the kind of checks and balances that the Lib Dem amendments have put down on the order paper.
James, do you think MP should have a final vote on Brexit? I mean, what's been called a meaningful vote here. What about the public? Should we all get a final vote on things?
Well, I mean, you asked me two questions there. You asked me about whether Parliament should have a meaningful vote, in inverted commas, and whether the public should have a meaningful vote. I think that the answer to both is, to the question on whether such a vote should be held in Parliament, the answer is it is going to be held in Parliament. But what cannot be offered is, either to Parliament or to the nation, an option to say, that deal isn't good enough, and therefore we will remain within the EU. That is exactly what Gideon and his party would want to see, but that's simply because they don't believe in Brexit, they want to thwart Brexit. The reality is that if you were to put such a proposition to the European Union during the negotiations, you would have just incentivized them to give us the worst possible deal, knowing that at the end of it, their aim was to encourage the British public or the British Parliament to vote against Brexit and call the whole thing off altogether, which of course is a ridiculous weakening of our negotiating position. And I suspect that rather explains why the Lib Dems are bumping along on 7% in the polls. 93% of the population simply don't agree with the position they're taking on this.
I mean, Gideon, this is democracy in action, what we're seeing. This is the process now.
Well, the last time we had a by-election nearby here, we got actually 70% of the vote in the Black Downs. I mean, yes, of course it's democracy. Of course we should have a process which gives the checks and balances the country and particularly businesses
and that is what's happening.
And farmers want to see.
This is democracy.
But it's not. The amendments that the government's put down are not giving a meaningful vote for Parliament at the end of the process, and they're not giving people the option. And the idea that you can face an iceberg, see an iceberg coming, run into the iceberg, and yet Parliament may make no alternative plans or arrangements is lunatic. What we need is a process that allows our country to thrive and has the best possible opportunities to trade freely, to continue with research programs, to continue with the business. There are some very, very worried farmers and businesses in Taunton Deane who are very concerned about the direction the government's taking.
OK, final question. James Heappey, the Customs Union is another big question mark here. What do you want to see us end up with?
Well, I mean, you said you'd come back to me on the things that Gideon was just saying, and I think I'll take those first, if I may.
Then we'll move on.
I mean, the important thing there is that Gideon and his colleagues simply don't agree with the result of the referendum. And even though Parliament has spent 250 hours debating this, he appears to not agree with the will of our nation's Parliament either. It is an unfortunate truth that he and his colleagues are going to need to accept sooner or later that we voted for Brexit. And what the vast majority of people in this country want is for us to get on with it and deliver it as soon as possible so that we can move on to other things. You were going to ask me about the Customs Union, Claire?
Yes, moving on to other things. The Customs Union, another big question mark. So what do you want to see us end up with?
Well, I think that the final detail of it will come forward in the Customs and Trade Bill, which will return to the Commons before recess. I'm very clear that the thing that we must guard against most of all is any sort of political bodge around the Irish border. That means no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, and certainly no border of any sort between Northern Ireland and mainland Great Britain. Those should be our key guiding principles, and I'm confident actually that if we can send the withdrawal bill back to the Lords amended in the right way today and tomorrow, that will give the Prime Minister a strong hand in Brussels and show to Brussels that we're serious about this and that they're going to need to find a deal that is better than the ones they've been putting forward on the Customs Union so far.
OK, we've run out of time. Thank you very much both for being with us. Gideon Amos there, who is with us, parliamentary candidate for Taunton Deane, Liberal Democrats there, with Wales Conservative MP James Heappey.